Good afternoon. Welcome to Enterprise Risk Management Reporting for Board, Executive, and Risk Committees. Without effective risk management reporting, bank boards and committees will be challenged to execute their oversight responsibilities. In today's webinar, we'll explore ERM reporting for the board and key committees so you can fine-tune your process. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Emily McCormick, the Vice President of Research at Bank Director, where I coordinate and execute research projects like our annual surveys and ranking banking study. I also write for Bank Director magazine and bankdirector.com. Today's webinar is brought to you by both Bank Director and Quantivate. Bank Director focuses on the strategic issues most fundamental to bank executives and boards through our magazine and web content, virtual and in-person events, and training programs. Quantivate helps banks manage their governance, risk, and compliance initiatives and streamline risk and compliance processes to drive efficiency and strategic decisions. We are offering CPE for continuing professional education credits for this webinar. In order to qualify for credits, you must be in attendance for the full and complete webinar, and you must participate in all 4 polls. If you want to receive CPE credit for this webinar, please email Kendall Kelly at kkelly@bankdirector.com. Certificates will be sent out 2 to 3 weeks after the webinar. Before we get going, let me share just a few things. First off, you've joined this webinar in listen-only mode, so don't worry, we can't hear you. Also, we recommend that you click on the slide bar at the bottom of the screen to put the presentation into full screen mode. If you have questions for our speaker, just note them by clicking the Q&A button found on the right side of your screen. You can do this at any time during the presentation. Once our presenter has finished with his talking points, we'll have a quick Q&A period where those questions will be addressed. There's no need to take detailed notes as the presentation will be shared with all attendees within 24 hours via email. You'll also be able to find it on both bankdirector.com and quantivate.com. If you have any technical issues, just note those using the moderator chat feature on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll do our best to take care of any issues. Regarding our polls, which as a reminder you'll need for CPE credit, those will also appear in the sidebar near the Q&A button. When you've selected your answer, just hit the vote button to submit your response. And finally, the opinions expressed in this webinar are those of the individual speaker only, and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the other speakers or of the entities with which the speakers are associated. So let me introduce our speaker today. Bill Hord is Vice President of Enterprise Risk Management Services at Quantivate. He has almost 30 years of experience as an executive in the financial services industry, where he's focused on a wide range of risk and compliance matters. Today, Bill consults with financial institutions and companies across the country to help them shape and build their risk management programs. Bill, I know you've got a lot of ground to cover, so please take it away.
Perfect. Thank you, Emily. You hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you, Bill.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Really quick, just a high-level agenda. Going to touch on some high-level responsibilities for each governance area. And the reason that I wanted to do that is because ultimately, that's what should really frame, how your reporting structure is really based around those particular responsibilities. And what we're going to cover today are pretty high level, but hopefully we can kind of maybe just shape the discussion, if you will. We will be touching base on board reporting, ERM committee at the executive level. I do realize that you might have also a board level ERM committee as well, but we'll also touch on audit committee. And when I was first designing this for Bank Director, I got to thinking about it, and because I do get clients all the time asking about these particular areas and what should we be providing, and what's best practice. And one of the things that I also wanted to add into this today was really just risk management reporting. So as a whole, what should we as risk managers who are pushing this information throughout the organization, what should we be looking at as well? So wanted to kind of add that in as a maybe hopefully a value add as well. And then as Emily had alluded to, we're going to have a Q&A. If we can't get to your question by the time the presentation's over, I'm more than happy to still address those questions, and Shuk can see that those get to me. So let's kind of jump right in. Before we do begin, I always ask, and a lot of times I use this because it really does kind of paint the picture, and it's, how much risk do you see? Because that's really what reporting is about, right? We're informing so that we can not only inform from a monitoring perspective, but also to hopefully make better risk-based decisions. And typically when you say, well, I'm going to make a risk-based decision, and if this is all I'm getting a report on, and maybe that's credit risk, which we certainly are reporting on, we're expanding that picture by adding in interest rate risk. We're expanding it a little further with liquidity. We even expand a little bit further with compliance, or even potentially the various concentration risk that we have. Question becomes well, what about reputation risk to the bank as a whole? How does that actually expand that picture and allow us to make better risk-based decisions? Or strategic risk, transactional fraud risk, right? The cyber risk that we have. We're so technologically driven, and we're so interfaced with so many other vendors and systems today. What about our overall market risk? And then just, basically that operational risk, what we do every single day just to simply open up the doors. Because now when you start to actually fold in and report across, these particular areas, you begin to see a much broader picture. And, I would much rather have this to make a risk-based decision around, than the latter. And so I put this out there because it does kind of drive home the point that, it's incumbent upon us as risk managers to ensure that we are providing the appropriate information to the given audience based upon their roles and responsibilities. So when you jump into that, you say, well, board and senior management, ultimately, board and senior management, we're responsible for all the risk in effect. And that's really kind of that risk management strategy. So, does management have the appropriate processes in place to really manage the risk, to uncover that risk, to ultimately monitor for that risk? And so when you look at, what the board is going to be receiving, and again, I realize some boards are at a 100,000-foot level, some are in the weeds, everybody in between. But generally, as a rule of thumb, this is typically what you would see from a responsibility perspective. And again, this is not all-encompassing by any stretch. Overall, when you start to look at ERM committee, and I'm looking here from the standpoint of really the management level committee, I realize that some of my banking clients also have a board level ERM committee, where the management level ERM committee provides the information that goes up to that board level committee. It gets distilled a little further before it goes to the board. Some folks don't have that board level committee, and so it's the information that's coming out of ERM, a management level, that's then being reported to the board. But this is kind of focusing on, and when you look at the management level committee, it really is all matters related. That is bottom up, top down, the overall management of the risk strategy, reviewing risk assessments so that we can identify appropriate risk to strategy. So again, when I talk strategic ERM, I'm talking top down. So that is risk to the overall strategy, the implementation of that strategy, the development of strategy, and then operational strategy, i.e. all of the business processes that have to be functioning and controls have to be working as designed every single day for us to simply operate, right? So we've got to be looking, and when we're in ERM, management level committee, we're responsible for looking at the top down and the bottom up. Of course, commenting and revising strategy, because certainly out of that is where decisions are being made. So, what is that strategy? Are we comfortable with that strategy? Is the mitigation that's being, offered up, and the monitoring of that for it to be implemented? That's part of our responsibilities. And of course, obviously, regular reporting to the board. So to distill all of that data and those business decisions, so that we can hand it to the board in a report to say, here's exactly, management has been monitoring this. We've made business decisions around that. Here's exactly what it is that we're doing, so that the board has the appropriate information to in effect, meet their governance requirements. Of course, overseeing educational programs so that we continue to mature our ERM program. And so that is maturing risk management programs on the front line, into the middle management, and even, in third line of defense. And then ultimately meeting on a monthly basis and documenting our decisions in those meeting minutes so that they can be given ultimately to the board. And again, it's not all encompassing, but by and large, for the most part, these are kind of those foundational elements that you would see. And so when you are looking to, and I always get this again, what should I be providing? And what I say is are you providing enough information and the right information so that the responsibilities, the governance responsibilities for that particular area can be met? And so one of the first things that I always ask is I say, well, let me take a look at your ERM policy. Let me look at your charter. I need to understand the roles and responsibilities that you've laid out inside of your institution to help you to better understand what it is that you should be providing so that those responsibilities could be met. But anytime, regardless of whether it was ERM or really any other risk discipline, it really comes down to is do we give them the right information so that they can meet their governance responsibilities? Now, when you look at, like, for example, the audit committee, here it's, they're providing feedback up to the board a lot of times. They're also providing some information from an advisory capacity to the ERM committee and or the department, depending on whether you have internal audit sitting as a non-voting member of your committee. Of course, at management's discretion, they can certainly participate in various meetings and help provide additional feedback. They provide a tremendous amount of good. They're a great resource when it comes to an advisory capacity. Of course, utilizing risk assessments that management has done to develop the audit plan, that's huge. And so a lot of that reporting data that we have, the risk assessment data that we have, they should be utilizing that to basically help them to create that audit plan. And so again, the type of information that we're even providing into audit committee is going to assist them and be much more effective and efficient in auditing us, based upon what we've actually done. Of course, reviewing management's, the review of management's key risk and controls. I mean, that's certainly a mandate for them, a primary responsibility, but then the evaluation of the reporting of those key risks and controls. So how well are we as management actually providing information up through the organization and ultimately to the board so that everyone can effectively meet those responsibilities? And then lastly, evaluating, providing assurance of the overall risk management process. So again, that's kind of the mandate there is that does management have what it takes? Do we have the proper process in place to effectively manage our strategic risk and our operational risk? And then you kind of drive that down really to ERM management in the department, because, I mean, ultimately, there is a leader, right? We've got the tone at the top, but there's generally, you've got a leader. We've got a chief risk officer. We have a vice president of risk management, wherever that sits inside of your institution, who is ultimately responsible for overseeing the administration of the entire program. And so those individuals obviously have to have a certain insight, additional information into the risk across the institution, because then you've got the department, and the department, whether it's a department of one or a department of many for ERM, there's still that day-to-day, there's got risk assessments have to be done, there's got to be tracking of indicators, there's got to be monitoring of movement of risk, and I mean just everything that has to go on day-to-day. And so the amount of information that's readily available to your teams is going to be imperative ultimately to how effective you are and ultimately to your success. And that kind of leads us really into our first poll question that I always ask this. And so do you currently document specific responsibilities for ERM and in terms of governance roles? And if you do, is that only in an ERM policy? Are you documenting in policy and in your charter? Yeah, it's documented, but it just kind of varies throughout various other policies and charters, or really, no, not at all. I doubt there's very many on here, Emily, that are going to say that they don't document roles and responsibilities, certainly not in our financial institution, but it'd be curious to see. There's no right or wrong answer here. The main thing is, has it been documented? Has it been articulated? Do people understand it, and does risk management know what those are so that we can try to ensure that we're providing the appropriate type of information to these individuals so that they can meet those governance responsibilities. And so we'll give it here a second. And with that, I'm going to take a drink real quick.
Yeah, everyone online, we'll give it about 10 seconds more. So please get your responses in.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting because a lot of times people say, well, where should I document this? And what I say is it just needs to be documented. I mean, generally what we'll see is a lot of the high-level board responsibilities we'll see a lot of times in the policy, and then they'll draft that down in policy through the other roles, but you see very, very specifically what the committee is when you see the charter, i.e. the reason for having a charter is to really, really get into the specifics of what you expect that committee to do for your institution.
Well, great. Bill, we're going to close this up.
Okay.
It looks like we're just shy of half that documented in their ERM policy and charter. 26% are documenting it through various policies and charters, and 22% only in their ERM policy. I do want to note that 6% say no, not at all.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you. And again, that, you know, almost half sitting at ERM policy and charter, that is typically where we would generally see it. And again, like I said, for those of you that aren't documenting it, or excuse me, that are documenting it in various policies and charters, you know, again, there's nothing wrong there. A lot of times, though, when you do your formalized ERM program, it's really good to, you know, make it somewhat concise, specifically around ERM as a whole, just to, you know, alleviate potentially any miscommunication or misunderstanding. And a lot of times, it's just easier to update. But thank you for your input. And I would typically see, yes, I would see most of my organizations are probably sitting at that policy and charter level. Perfect. Thank you. So let's jump in real quick, and this is very data point driven. So what I've tried to do here is throughout the presentation is to say, look, you know, can you compare and contrast what you're providing today to the board at a strategic level, to the board at an operational level, if you do so, and be able to try to compare. Do I offer these up? Should I offer these up? And do I have this data? So, you know, strategy, overall strategy related to risk appetite, related to risk category. So, you know, when we look at our strategy, we're telling the board, hey, we are taking all of our various risk categories. You've told us what the risk appetite is, and here's where our strategy is in relationship to our overall risk categories. That is good. It allows them to not only, look at that and say, great, you're playing exactly within the playing field that I gave you, or, you know, you're outside of that. Why are you outside of that? Well, you're going to already know that because we're going to have talked about that information later. But the other piece is sometimes it's like, you know what, you know, our risk appetite for credit risk is, you know, say medium, and we're at low medium, and that could equally be, well, why? I mean, you know, we've given you that appetite. Maybe we need to take on a little bit more risk. So that's a big one. Of course, giving the board key risks and opportunities related to the strategy. So what are the specific key risks and the opportunities that management has outlined from the strategy that would be of concern, that we would want to be monitoring for? The board should understand what those key risks are. It's very difficult to have a discussion and ask questions if we don't even have an understanding of what these key risks and opportunities are related to our you know, the development and the implementation of our long-term strategy. Of course, KPIs for, you know, against our objectives and our initiatives. I would venture to guess today you guys are already doing that. You're saying, you know, here's the performance of monitoring of where we're at in terms of our objectives and our initiatives. But believe it or not, I actually, for some folks that's not part of it, but that's absolutely key. It gives them that high-level understanding of, are we on the right track? Key risk indicators to strategic initiatives. Strategic initiatives, i.e. being corporate projects. The risk is always in where we're going. Objectives are how we're getting there. Objectives are where are we going. The strategic initiatives, the corporate projects are how we're going to get there. And so those key risk indicators, if you're doing them, and if you're not, you certainly should be, but are those risks materializing that can have potentially a negative impact on the execution of our strategy? Of course, change management plans to strategy, because If any of these things are not going the way they're supposed to be, well, ultimately management's going to create a change management plan. And here's how we're going to change the strategy, how we're going to change course. And that should absolutely be information that the board is privy to so that they can understand, well, what is exactly management? What are they doing? We're not asking the board to potentially weigh in and create those change management plans, although I do have some of my clients that their board does that. But at the end of the day, they should have an understanding of what those change management plans are, because it is a departure in some form or fashion from the strategy that we originally approved. And so from a strategic perspective, this is a good bellwether for them to be able to have a really good high-level understanding from an enterprise risk perspective. Because again, when we talk about risk categories, we're providing information around compliance risk, interest rate, liquidity, strategic, transactional fraud, reputation, operational risk, whatever your particular risk categories are. Now, some boards like to have that tactical operations. Some management teams think that it's a little too much in the weeds. However, hopefully what you're able to derive from this is that you're not getting so far into the weeds, but you are still at least giving the board an understanding of what's happening, in a day-to-day functioning of the bank. So risk category trending, right? So looking at that, is compliance risk going up operationally? And if so, why, right? I would want to know as a board member, why is my compliance risk going up or going down? Why is my interest rate risk going up or down, operationally in my day-to-day dealings inside of the bank? Overall residual risk by category compared to risk appetite. So looking at specifically operationally my residual risk around those particular risk categories, and how does that compare to my risk appetite? Because I told you I wanted to operate operationally within a certain appetite for compliance, for liquidity risk, for whatever. And are we meeting that, right? Because, again, we're not giving them all of the details necessarily around that, but what we're giving them is the understanding to be able to effectively ask the question, and as it relates to monitoring, which is part of their governance responsibilities. Of course, overall risk trend, so inherent risk to residual risk. So looking at, hey, well, just, here's that gross, here's that raw inherent risk of what we're doing. And then, here's the residual, here's that comparison to show you how well, here's our risk, but here's how well we're controlling that risk. Because again, what it allows them to do is that, if the inherent risk is going up and the residual risk is going down, well, then, I can surmise that we've addressed that risk and we've put in better controls. But if it's doing the reverse, if residual is going up and inherent happens to be going down, well then, why? We've obviously removed some controls, or we're not as effective, something's going on. And then lastly, open control mitigation action items. So this is, again, where we've assessed our business, we have found some sort of control deficiency, and so we're not giving them all of the details here. You certainly could, but we're simply letting them know, hey, we've done our job, we're doing our job, we have found a particular deficiency, and we have an action plan to address it. And again, it allows them to ask questions without going too far into the weeds. So that's kind of your board from a bottom-up viewpoint. And that poll puts us into our next poll question, because it's always interesting. So do you currently today, report ERM data to your board? No, we don't have a formalized ERM program yet. So obviously we're not reporting really kind of formalized ERM data. B, yes, but it's really, really high level. It doesn't go to the level of what I've just been talking about in terms of from the strategy side. C, yes, but you're only providing strategic information top down. So you're really not providing them any kind of insight into the bottom up or the operational function of the bank. It's just really kind of those strategic objectives and strategic initiatives that you're implementing. D, I'm just providing operational, because maybe you're not risk assessing and providing enterprise risk data to them strategically, but you do assess obviously all of your business processes, so therefore you've got that data. Or E, yes, we're providing both, top-down and bottom-up data to our board. And this is one, Emily, as the responses come in, I get a lot of questions around this as, I want to keep my boards out of the weeds, so I only give them that high-level information. Or, I give a high-level information, to a board-level ERM committee, and they distill it down even further. Or, but a best practice, and what you will begin to find more and more of my clients are doing, is they are refining that strategic and operational to provide that, enterprise, right? To provide that viewpoint of, and again, it's from a monitoring perspective. It's not from a decision-making perspective. It allows the board to at least have that outside looking in, to be able to ask the appropriate questions. Because if you don't give them at least enough information to ask an honest, informed question, it's really kind of hard for you to say that they're really complying with their governance responsibilities.
Well, Bill, I think we're in a spot where we can close it up. So we're going to go on and close this out. And more than half, at 54%, say that they do currently report both strategic and operational risk. We've got just shy of a quarter that report only very high-level risk information. 12% split either one risk or operational or strategic risk, and 11% do not yet have a formalized ERM program.
Okay, perfect. And so for more than 50%, and that would have been what I would have expected. That's kind of typically what I do see when I first start working with clients that have that have had an ERM program for a while, that they're providing that appropriate viewpoint in from top down and bottom up. For those of you that don't have a formalized ERM program yet, I would certainly advise that you consider, when you are building out that program, building out those roles and responsibilities, that you kind of take into consideration that they do need to see both. Otherwise, you're really only giving them half of the picture, because strategy implemented today becomes operational business processes tomorrow. They don't live in a vacuum. If I implement strategy, eventually I got to support it. If I make changes operationally, that potentially could have impact on key risk indicators and or even potentially the performance metrics of strategy, because they don't exist in a vacuum. So I appreciate everybody's feedback on that, and but certainly, E is definitely a best practice for sure. All right. So let's look at, ERM committee. And again, looking at that, I'm talking really the management level. Now, sometimes you'll see it'll be a management level, and they might have a board liaison on that committee. It may be just purely management on that committee. And then, like I'd also mentioned, there might be a board level. I did not put in here that board level ERM committee. What I'm really talking about here is where these business decisions are being made. And put together so that they can ultimately be implemented inside of the bank, and then the information being distilled so it can be provided up to the board like we were just talking about. So what you're going to see is, in some instances, you're going to see an overlap of some of the data points, and that's by design. You never want to give the board, right, more information than what the committee has, because, how would, the committee is where the risk-based discussions are being had and the risk-based business decisions are being made. So, again, strategy to risk appetite related to risk categories, that there's an overlap there by design. Key risk and opportunities and associated objectives and initiatives. Now, we were providing key risk and opportunities, as a whole to the board. And you could certainly say, well, I'm going to also provide those key risk and opportunities that we've specifically designated to various objectives and initiatives, and that's okay too. But sometimes it's another layer of data that may or may not be valuable to your board, but certainly is for your committee for having an understanding and having a risk-based discussion. Of course, KPIs. Again, we've got KPIs. We're giving those KPIs for strategic objectives and initiatives, to the board. But man, the movement of these, whether these are in goal, they're less than, they're ahead of goal, whatever the case may be. I mean, that certainly means that there's a risk-based discussion happening here, and potentially, depending on where those KPIs are at, means that we're going to make changes because things are not where they're supposed to be. Well, when we introduce the potential for that change, we potentially introduce risk. We're better to talk about, risk than inside of our ERM committee. Of course, KRIs to strategic initiatives. And remember, folks, strategic objectives, where we want to take the bank, generally that's not where you're going to have the detailed risk discussion. You are going to have the detailed risk discussion, and i.e. subsequently creating key risk indicators around the strategic initiatives, around the how are we going to do it. The risk is not in, being at Disney World. The risk is in how are we getting there? Are we driving? Are we flying? Are we taking the train? Are we walking? Right? That's where we can discuss risk. So once we understand those risks, we can create effective KRIs. And so the movement of those KRIs absolutely is a risk-based discussion that needs to be had, because those KRIs, one risk triggering, that risk could be manifesting, and it could be potentially negatively impacting one or more initiatives that are supposed to be driving results to these objectives. And so that is absolutely critical. Forward-looking indicators to the ERM committee are critical for a risk-based decision-making. Of course, key indicators trending and moving towards tolerance limits and specific strategies that are related. So it's not that they're outside of, they're not in the red, if you will, if you just use a stoplight type of analogy, but they're not moving in the right direction. They've started, they're not even potentially close to being outside of tolerance limits, but they are moving. So that doesn't mean that we necessarily have to be having a discussion about, well, what are we going to change? But we need to start framing that discussion, because if that continues to move in the wrong direction, better to have started framing that discussion now than waiting for it later. And so this type of data is vitally important that we should be bringing to the committee. Of course, operational change management impact to strategic objectives. So what are we talking about here is we're saying, look, we are making changes operationally. Well, do we understand how those changes will actually, the ripple effect or the upstream effect? Because again, operationally doesn't exist in a vacuum to strategy. If we make changes operationally, we better understand, is there potential for there to be a tangent of impact, good, bad, or indifferent, to our strategic objectives and our initiatives? Because in the absence of knowing that, you can't be for sure. And if I make a change here and it's going to have a potentially negative impact on a piece of strategy, I may want to rethink that operational change. And again, maybe I have to do that, but that means that I may have to make change, strategically. So again, it's all about understanding those tangents between the data. Well, if you're not reporting on that, it's very difficult to have those risk-based discussions and ask appropriate questions. Of course, change management plans to strategy. So this is just the reverse. It's like, hey, you know what? We've had this strategy, but now we're going to change it. Well, what does that mean? And what does that mean to the downstream? And then you look at ERM committee from the tactical, right? I mean, we're managing the business. So again, we've got overall residual risk by category compared to your appetite. We've provided a level of that information, but this is vitally important, because this is going to, if you're out of appetite operationally in any given business process or department, well, then potentially you're going to be making changes. Do you understand the tangents or the ripple effect of those changes? Of course, products and services residual. So understanding where your products are, because as you make changes to your products, again, they don't live in a vacuum. So your products and services, if you don't understand the residual impact or the aggregation of the residual impact of all of the applicable risk categories to a given product, you make a change to that product, well, that change potentially is going to impact your overall processes because your processes have to support it, and potentially products and services are always being enhanced or added to through strategy. So again, there is a tangent there. Reporting and understanding that is part of good governance and allows for good line of questioning. Of course, overall risk trending to inherent risk to residual, we talked about that with the board. That's very good. Top 10 processes by risk category. So what business processes are the heaviest hitters in terms of just overall risk by category? And then even what are my top 10 risks by residual risk? So that I can, if I'm going to I have so much time to really kind of determine and understand where my risk is at, I definitely want to start playing in the places that have the heaviest hit. Now, this could be, some people do top 20, some people do top 15. There's no right or wrong here, but understanding this data and so that you can focus on it and know and see, is this moving? Why is it moving up or down? Why did I have the top 10 this month and now next month the top 10 is different? Or, a couple have changed. Understanding why and asking that question is vitally important. Of course, open and overdue mitigation action item, because if we have found a deficiency and we've agreed as management to correct it, if it's overdue, question is why. If it was that important that we agreed that we were going to create a mitigation strategy around it and it's overdue, we should certainly be understanding why. Of course, any and all remediation plans have a impact upstream and downstream because we're going to put money around it, we're going to put human resources around it. Those remediation plans, we better understand what they are and ultimately what their impact is and what their ripple effect potentially could be. So again, if we're not reporting on that, it's awful tough. Strategy change management, and that's what I was just talking about a minute ago, is are we reporting what we're doing in terms of changing strategy and how does that ultimately impact products and services and the business processes that have to support them, because they don't exist, again, in a vacuum. If I change my strategy, eventually it is going to have a downstream impact on product services and or processes. And then lastly this is where risk management really shines, is the what if analysis profile. So we're doing all these things. What if? Okay, well, if this is moving in this direction and we flip this trigger, well, what if? What changes? That is where understanding these data tangents upstream and downstream and being able to report on that what if analysis provides us that ability to really, really understand before we implement the change, before we spend the time and money, do we really understand the ramifications? And that is absolutely critical. So that kind of takes us from, ERM committee, strategic and tactical. Very quickly on audit side, you may not be reporting into audit, but there are a lot of banks that do, and there is certainly a lot of best practices around it. More and more audit committees are being asked by the board, and it's certainly being something that's being brought up with internal auditors, that they should be taking more of a peek into how management is managing the overall strategy, not just the operations. And so strategy to risk appetite related to risk categories, them understanding the same thing the board is understanding can also help with assurances. Of course, key risks related to strategy, same thing with the board, right? They're seeing basically what the board is getting. Of course, KPIs, where is management in terms of our progress for our objectives and initiatives, and then lastly, key risk indicators to strategy, because, they have insight, right? These folks are great resources. They can potentially provide some additional feedback if they know this. In the absence of them knowing this, it's very difficult for them to even kind of offer up an opinion. So it's not so much that they're even auditing this aspect as it is, I'm providing you this information. And, I've done this in the past and gotten very good feedback from my auditors. Tactically, as you can imagine, that's kind of where they really live today, which is overall risk trend of inherent risk to residual, That gives them an understanding of operationally, where is the business moving? Risk category trending. Again, where is the business moving operationally today? Top 10 processes. This helps them to understand, and as they build their audit plan for next year, okay, well, what are the 10 top processes by risk category? It helps them to then come in and audit based upon management's assumptions. Of course, top 10 risk by residual risk. This again helps them to understand, because some risks manifest themselves across multiple places in the organization. So understanding what those are can help them with their overall audit plan. They need to understand any open mitigation action items, because if we have found it through an assessment and it's an open mitigation action item, it's not a finding in an internal audit. They can talk about it in the audit report, but if it's an open mitigation action item because management has opened it, it's not a finding. Of course, they're gonna obviously be interested in anything that's overdue, and a lot of times this was initially the only thing that I was reporting to audit committee in the beginning as a management supplemental were these two things here. Because they go strictly back to their mandate, primary responsibility, which is control assurances. And then my control remediation plans. So, okay, I've identified these deficiencies. Here is what my plan is. Here's who owns it. Here's what I'm going to do about it. I'm going to automate it. I'm going to increase the manual component of it, whatever the case may be, so that they have an understanding. It helps them as they do audits and as they develop audit plans. All right. Next poll question. Does your institution currently report ERM data to both ERM and the audit committee? And this is always an interesting one when I first start talking to my clients. So no, we don't report to either committee. We just report to audit committee because we don't have a formalized ERM program yet. We're just reporting data to ERM committee, or we are reporting to both. And I would say, Emily, what we typically are seeing here is for those that have a formalized ERM program, they're kind of they get their feet wet first, right? So they start off with C, right? We're only reporting things to ERM committee until they can kind of get their feet under them, really kind of understand and start feeling good about, the overall reporting and what they're talking about, and really what kind of information that they've got access to at that point. But at some point in your maturation, you start to provide more additional data, into audit committee that can help them, from an operational standpoint. And if you are of the mindset that you're like, hey, you know what, the board wants the audit committee to have a greater understanding of what's going on in terms of the management of the overall strategy, not just the operations, then you start to typically see both ERM and audit information going into committee.
All right, we'll give this about 10 more seconds before we close this out. Bill, we actually got a question that came in that I thought you might want to address because it's actually relevant to this poll question. Mm-hmm. One of our attendees asked, is it appropriate for small institutions, I believe they mean, under 500 million, but is it appropriate for small institutions to run ERM through the bank's audit committee instead of establishing a separate ERM committee?
Ooh, that is a great question, and one that I get quite a bit. And what I would tell you is that a lot of times the impetus for an ERM program to get started in a smaller financial institution is the fact that internal audit is starting to really cross the boundaries of into management, right? It's a fine line. It's very hard to audit if you are, if you're actually making management decisions. And so what I would tell you is that you will typically see, the audit committee kind of really maybe start and help you to maybe create that ERM program. But at some point, there needs to truly be a defining line, right? Because ERM assessing is just that. It is an assessment. It is not an audit. It is management saying, we have evaluated this. This is our evaluation. And then there needs to be an independent party, and that is internal audit, who comes in and looks at that assessment and says, we agree or we don't agree. And if we agree, here's why. And if we don't agree, here's why. It's very difficult to really run an effective ERM program and still be an internal auditor. I'm not saying that it can't be done. It's just that at some point in time, you do start to, pierce the veil, if you will, and you start to potentially, internal audit starts to feel a little bit more like management than they are internal audit. Hopefully that answers the question, because that's it's a broader discussion for sure.
Yeah, absolutely it is. We have gone ahead and closed the poll. And Bill, we've got almost half that report to both the ERM and audit committee, 26% just to the audit committee because they do not have a formalized ERM program yet, 19% only to ERM, and 9% do not report to either committee.
Perfect. Okay, so again, a good half reporting, and again, I would think that probably those institutions probably have maybe a little bit more mature ERM program. But my point here today also was just to kind of give folks an idea of maybe what other folks are doing, but also the reason why there's value in doing so. And we're closing in at about a quarter till. And I really want to talk about, because I've got another poll question, but I really want to go through just very quickly. This was kind of the value add I hope to, because a lot of times, if you think about this, you really could start in the reverse. We could have started here. We could have moved, to ERM committee to audit committee, audit committee up into the board, because you're kind of distilling information as it goes up. But I really wanted to show you, there are definitely some things in here that you as risk management should be reporting so that you have this data. Because this data could be data that you're going to want to talk about at ERM committee, but it's certainly data that's going to help you as a risk manager to just really help you to meet your responsibilities. And of course, then overall risk trending inherent to residual. If you don't have any idea, and we talked about this, giving this information to other entities, but you have to really have an understanding, where is this going? Because if it's moving up, it's moving down, it's changing. Well, why? The question always is why? Why? You have to be able to drive into the why. Overall risk trending by department. This is a big one, because if you are seeing risk you've got it being able to be broke out by department, and you start seeing risk moving up in a particular department. Again, why? Why is that? Did they change controls? Did they stop doing some controls? Why did the risk go up? Did they add something, right? Or why is the risk going down? And more importantly, did you expect it to? That's another big thing. Of course, top 10 risks by residual. Again, you have to know those things. You have to know your risk category trending overall. Right. So whether you are looking at, 8 risk categories, 10 risk categories, I don't care how many risk categories you're looking at. Do you understand the trending, and do you understand why it is moving? That's critical. Risk categories by risk appetite. So it's one thing to understand the trending, but how are those things related to risk appetite? Because that's vitally important. That's the board and management saying, here's where I told you to play. Are we playing in that space? And if not, why? Because if we aren't, we're going to talk about that. Management's going to make a decision of how they're going to make a change to get it back into appetite or not. In either way, that means that there's potentially going to be upstream impact potentially to strategy, and downstream impact to operations. Of course, overall residual risk by category. So, it's one thing to understand the inherent risk, but what's the specific residual risk? Because was really where we want to play in. We want to understand residual risk. So after we've applied controls, what's left over? And are we okay with that? Again, top 10 residual risks by processes, by risk category. Understanding operationally, these are my business processes, and I can tell you where those business processes lie residually by risk category. Of course, all of your key risk indicators, so what's at risk? So whether that's a performance indicator or a risk indicator, what's at risk? And a lot of times you're like, well, thanks, Mr. Obvious. But you would be amazed at folks are just simply they're going, oh man, it was green, now it's red. Okay, well, we should be understanding well before that. Key risk and performance indicators that are out of appetite. If you are not tracking KPIs and KRIs to risk appetite, you should, because again, Risk appetite is that boundaries of which that we're supposed to be operating our business within. Of course, upcoming key indicator measurements. It's very hard for you to know all of this stuff if measurements are not getting into your system systematically and on time. If you're supposed to be getting certain metrics every single month and you're not getting them, it's very hard for you to be accurate in your overall risk management. So knowing what's coming also can help you to better manage. Incomplete risk assessment. So where are we at, right? It doesn't help you because these risk assessments are done in real time. So as that data comes in, that data changes everything. It cascades across the system. It cascades up to everything that it's tied to strategically, everything downstream that it's tied to, the products that it's tied to. If you've got an incomplete risk assessment, you've got incomplete risk data. Upcoming risk assessments, this is big. What do I have coming up this quarter that's supposed to be coming in? Because that helps me also to understand that movement of just the business overall. I can immediately go, man, I'm pretty sure I know why this is, my trending has moved because, we've either done this risk assessment or we've got a risk assessment coming up, and we know that we've got big changes in that process. Of course, life cycle. What is your entire risk assessment universe? That means risk assessing of strategy, top down, risk assessing of bottom up, risk assessing of new products, risk assessing of major changes to products. Where are you at? Can you just stand back and look and say, I can tell you where I'm at because I manage all of that. Upcoming notifications. It's very difficult to keep track of all of this data if you don't have systematic notifications. And so you can't do that. Well, you can do this. I've done it before through, spreadsheets back in the day and, reminders on Outlook and whatnot. But you just, you spend more time, trying to manage notifications than you kind of get benefit from. So having systematic notifications of all of this is critical to helping you just stay sane and keep track of all of your data. Any open mitigation action items, that's kind of a no-brainer. Anything that's overdue so that you can reach out to those owners in the business to say what's going on, because you're going to be asked, why is this overdue? You're going to be asked that from internal audit. You're going to be asked that potentially from the board ERM committee or from the board, and certainly from your own committee. Strategic change management plans that impact strategy. Strategic change management plans that could impact products and services in the business processes. So this is making changes that impact your overall strategy. This is making change plans that impact downstream from strategy, so that would impact product services and business processes. Operational change management. So this is understanding the change management that's moving up. So now I'm making a change operationally. How does that, if any, impact objectives and initiatives? Because these are all data points that you're going to need to talk about in committee, because you're going to talk about these things, which means there's going to be a business decision made, which potentially means there's going to be a change introduced as a result. You better understand the ramifications of that change. That's effective ERM. Lastly, operational change management that impacts products and services, because I can make a change in my business processes, and that is definitely potentially going to have an impact on product services and ultimately business processes. And that leads us up to the very last poll, and then we're going to do a quick Q&A. That last poll question is, and I always like to ask this, I know I went through this at kind of a lightning pace, and it was because it's very data point driven, but again, I wanted to make sure that I gave you some ability to say, man, do we have this data point, and B, who should we be giving this to based upon our own roles and responsibilities? So when you look at today's presentation, are you even going to consider any changes to your current reporting process? And so A is, nope, our current reporting process is extremely robust. We're good to go. Thanks, great information, but we're cool. B, we're going to discuss it with our executive team and to potentially better improve our process. C, we're absolutely need to begin developing more strategic top-down reporting. D, we should begin developing more detailed bottom-up reporting. Or E, we just need to begin developing more detailed top-down and bottom-up reporting. There is, again, there's probably going to be a smattering here again, Emily, because quite frankly, everybody is at a different maturation point, in their life cycle of ERM. And everybody has, a different governance structure. I mean, again, we've got that, like we laid out in the beginning, we've got an overall structure, but some boards require more details than others. Some board level ERM committees require more than others, right? Some people give information to the audit committee, some don't, right? The question comes down to is, when you really look at your governance responsibilities and the people that have to make sure that those responsibilities, because they're theirs, are we providing them with the appropriate data points for them to effectively do those responsibilities? That's really what it boils down to. Because I could tell you what I used to report to my board years and years ago, 7 years after I was there as head of risk, what we were reporting across the organization had changed, because you get smarter, you get more data points, you get better at doing what you're doing. It's a maturation process. So I don't begrudge anybody for where they're at in any place. It's just, are we getting better? And my question here is just that, do you think from today's presentation that there's anything you're going to be able to glean that may potentially help you?
Great. So, Bill, we're going to close this poll up, but I do want to throw out to our attendees, if you do have any questions for Bill, go on and get those in. If we can't address them today, we can definitely do that offline. I know Bill's happy to follow up. But Bill, as far as that poll, 39% say they'll discuss with the executive team to better improve reporting, and 35% say they're going to begin developing more detailed strategy and operational reporting. So most are reporting some kind of planned change.
Perfect. So, well, then that's good. And I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate your willingness to provide that information, because, again, it is all about maturing. And I love the fact to hear that that's exactly what you guys are, in effect, indicating. You're saying, hey, you know what? We can always get better. So I really do appreciate. And, given that, let's jump in. I think we've got maybe just a couple minutes. I usually like to leave at least 10 minutes, and I think I missed my mark a little bit, but I didn't want to not provide at least a good foundation there for you.
Oh, absolutely. And it was a lot of great information, Bill. Yeah, I think we've got time for about one or two questions. Okay. The first one, our bank reports risks to our board annually. Is that sufficient?
Ooh, and that's kind of initially right out of the gate what a lot of folks end up doing. And here's what I would tell you. Your risks are changing all of the time. Sometimes, certainly monthly. And so the question becomes is depending on the governance responsibilities that your board has, do you think that it's adequate just to simply give them a once a year overview of here's kind of what our risks are? Because I'll guarantee you that a lot of the risks maybe potentially on that report may not be, when you sit right down, you could say, yeah, it's at a point in time, but those risks are changing quite frequently. And quite frankly, are those risks at the strategy level or at the operational level? And so what I like to do is I like to make sure that the board is at least getting that top-down, bottom-up view no less than quarterly. And again, it doesn't have to be a huge amount of detail. You can go back to what we were talking about in the presentation. But in my opinion, and what I've experienced with my own boards over the years, just a one-time annual report, I don't know how most boards could say that they effectively are really doing their governance responsibilities if that's really all they're getting.
Yeah, the risks are absolutely coming at us fast and furious these days, it seems. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, Bill, we are out of time. And as I mentioned, Bill said he's more than happy to follow up offline. So if you do have any final questions, get them in the next minute. As a reminder, we will be sending out the recorded version of this webinar within 24 hours. You'll also find it on both bankdirector.com and quantivate.com. And Bill, thank you so much. Thanks to you and Quantivate for co-hosting today's webinar, and thanks to everyone out there for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Our pleasure. Thank you. Have a good day.